Hello everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. So on my video I uploaded yesterday, I got a couple comments. Sorry, when I first uploaded, I had the comments turned off, my mistake. But I got a couple after I turned it on, and one of them was a good question. And when I have good questions, I don't like just reply with the comments because not many people see that. So I thought I'd do a video on the topic just so I could put it out there because it brought up some interesting topics. So let's see if I can find this. There we go. Yes. So user Uterstrects says, what do you say to the argument that many women won't have sex with uncut guys and uncut decreases pleasure for women? I know you're gay, but it is still a persuasive argument for straight guys. So there's two things to really drive home on this. One is baked into that question, the idea that you would circumcise your son because you think it's going to help him with women. Whether or not that's true, that's a separate question, but baked into that are assumptions about what you can justifiably do to your child. And this kind of is one of the reasons circumcision is an interesting topic philosophically and as like a desert island scenario, because it drives down to the question of what are the rights and obligations of parents vis-a-vis their children, what can they do? Now, that question kind of implies that a child is some kind of property that, not only property, but a divisible property, that the parents own them and they can chop it up however they want. They could say, well, this is our child, and I think that it would look better or be better if it didn't have ears or didn't have a penis or didn't have a clitoral hood or whatever else. And there is, historically there have been societies that had that kind of view of children, that saw children as basically completely property. Famously in like Roman society, you had the pater familiaris, you had the head of the family, and if you wanted to kill a child, you could. Not that that would be very common, but you could. If you wanted to beat it, if you wanted to scar it, whatever, that would be fine. And that type of thinking, that ideology, certainly would allow for you to cut off the foreskin for any reason, including if you wanted it because you thought it would help them out with girls later in life, because you would basically own them. They would be your property to do with as you please. However, I think that very few people actually hold that as a general principle. Parents have a lot of obligations to their children, and I think I would pose this to you. What other body parts do you think that the parents are allowed to remove because they think it might help them with children? So we know in many other cultures, you could say, I think that it would be better if my son had a scar on his face because women find that hot. Look at Jason Momoa. Look at, whoever else. Scars on your face can make you seem like you're more sexy or that you're more virile. So go to the doctor and say, go ahead and put a gash. I want it on his eyebrow. I want it across his nose, maybe on his cheek. Just scar his face because that'll look really cool. Or maybe give him a scar someplace else. Give him a cross-shaped scar. Yeah, maybe you think, well, we're religious and we want him to find a nice religious girl, so let's have the doctor scar or tattoo, a crucifix into them. No, you wouldn't allow that. I think that anyone who asked that question would say, no, of course you can't decide that it would be more desirable, to make them more desirable for a partner. And again, apply this also to girls, right? This is the thing is, in Muslim societies where female circumcision is really common, I don't think it's common in every Muslim society, but it's common in many of them. One of the things is they'll say is like, oh, well, a man wants a clean, a clean woman, and a clean woman has some degree of circumcision. The female circumcision varies quite a lot. How much is taken off? Some forms are less invasive than male circumcision. Some forms are more invasive than male circumcision. But whatever the society is, they could say, well, the norm in our society is that a woman shouldn't have any external genitalia at all. She shouldn't have labia. She shouldn't have a clitoris. She shouldn't have a clitoral hood. So therefore, it should be cut off because we want her to get a man. And what kind of man is going to marry a woman who isn't circumcised, right? If that argument sounds ridiculous to you and you wouldn't find that persuasive, and yet you find the idea that you can circumcise your son for that same reason persuasive, I think that's a really good indicator for you to realize that you have a cultural bias there. It's exactly the same. So, in principle, it's exactly the same. You might say in practice there are differences between giving someone a tattoo. I say other things too, like maybe a girl would like a guy with earrings, or with like in other cultures, maybe sound crazy, but with a lip disc or an elongated neck or a flattened forehead or filed teeth. There were Aztecs would file their teeth. If you would know, hey, well, we want our son to, like look regal or whatever, so we're going to file his teeth down, and then all the women will think he's pretty hot. No, you shouldn't be able to do that. Like the life form there, the human life there, they have a property, they have a primary interest in it, and parents have fiduciary rights. They have rights to do what's in the best interest of the child, and that kind of in a way though that they would assume that they would choose to do themselves. And the thing is, very few men are going to choose to circumcise themselves. Okay, men who grow up in the United States who are uncircumcised, very few of them choose to get circumcised. Yes, some do. There's a lot of social pressure to do so, but not many. Most are happy with their foreskin. So, and I think also the question kind of makes a lot of cultural assumptions too. So that's the first point though. So the first point is it makes assumptions about what parents can do to their children that I don't think the people who ask the question really hold as a principle. I think that it raises serious questions like, oh, if we can, do whatever we want because we think it will be beneficial, including surgery. Like you have a lot of leeway as a parent. You could encourage your child to be healthy. You could feed them healthy food. You could have them lead an active lifestyle. You could, give them good social skills. You could encourage them to have abilities that women will find attractive. Right? Teach them to dance, teach them to sing, teach them to be athletic, whatever else. There are things you could do like that, and to try and sculpt their upbringing to do that. But to start cutting up their body, those are decisions that they can't undo. And here's the other thing. You don't know if a baby's going to be straight or not. So imagine if I were to confront my parents and I was like, hey, I'm really upset that you cut off my dick. They're part of it anyway. It's really been a problem for me. It's really upset me. And they said, well, we wanted you to, find a woman, and a woman prefers a cut dick. What good did that do me? Didn't do me any good. And you don't know when you have your infant laying there that he's not going to be gay. And I disagree with the argument that foreskin is important to gay people, but it's not important to not gay people. That's an assumption also baked into your question that I don't agree with. But again, if we just accept that assumption, well, I'll steel man your argument and say, let's assume that that's true, which it's not, but let's assume that it is. Then you still have that problem, like, well, you just circumcised your gay son. You have no idea if he's gay or straight, and for you to just decide that. And also, do women like botches? Do you think women like a foreskin or a dick that has skin bridges? Do you think they like a dick that's head is scarified horribly, or is gone, or is infibulated, or where the skin is so tight that it looks like it's going to rip, or maybe does rip? Those are all risks that happen when you have a circumcision of a neonate. So, your expectation of what a woman's going to want in the future, you're not going to be able to craft the dick perfectly to that right then, because they really don't have the skill when they're doing a neonate to anticipate how much it's going to grow, how it's going to fit. So again, there's assumptions based in there what you can do to kids that I don't think people will really accept in principle. Again, you would be horrified if someone said, I think it would be, earlobes are kind of gross. I think girls like, if it's not like that, so let's cut his ears off or cut his earlobes off or give him a tattoo or whatever else. Not, girls like tattoos, right? So let's give him some tattoos so all the kindergarten. No, that's absolutely not. If he decides later, again, there's a easy solution to this. If he comes to agree with you later, if he gets to be 18 or 17 or whatever the age is and says, it's a problem for me, I don't enjoy this, so I'm going to go ahead and get circumcised. There's nothing in that's difficult, right? There's no reason to not give him that choice. He can decide to do that if he really feels that way, and occasionally they do. It's rare, and I also think that it's important to point that out. Yes, you can find some guys, especially in the States, where foreskin has been stigmatized for so long, who they're uncircumcised, and even if they have no medical problems, they will sometimes, because of social pressure that's usually not direct. It's rare that these guys are getting pointed at and yelled at and ridiculed, but many of them feel alienated. They feel like they don't fit in, or they have in the past. I think this is probably no longer true, but they have in the past. And they'll go, okay, I want to get circumcised. Well, at least it was their choice then. But that's still very rare. Most of them are going to say, yeah, at the end of the day, I prefer to have my foreskin, even if it is giving me some kind of social stigma, right? They love their penis as much as a cut guy does, and there's really no chance that they're going to. And if they ever did feel like, no, I really want to get cut, then they can get cut. Okay, that's not a decision they need to have made for them when they're a week old or a year old. That's a decision that they can make for themselves once they become sexually active, not before, really. Once they're an adult, once they can make a decision. Now, legally, and that is kind of is a separate question, but it's going to be in the teens, at the very least, and after they become sexually active, or at least capable of being sexually active. So there's absolutely no reason for you to make that decision for them that early. They can decide for themselves. I know people who have done that. Like I said, I've told this story before. I've met a guy at Porcupine Freedom Festival 2 years ago who, he saw my shirt and he was like, I want to talk about that. And his input was that he was uncircumcised. His parents didn't want him to be circumcised. And he felt alienated, even though literally nobody said anything and none of his friends even knew. And when he was 13, he begged them to let him get circumcised. And so they did. They relented. And he said it was the worst decision of his life. He felt like he lost all sensitivity and that it completely transformed, his penis in a way that was negative. It just reduced the universe of sexual pleasure to him in a way that was, heartbreaking. He's really upset about it. And this is a guy now who's in his mid to late 20s. So most guys aren't going to do that. And so you have to understand, like, when you have a fiduciary responsibility with somebody, you can't say, well, I'm going to make this decision because there's a rare case where some people do make that decision. Think about this like financially. Let's say somebody dies intestate. They die without a will and they have assets. And it turns out that they really liked a certain golf club. They really liked a certain sports team. They really liked, a certain church or whatever. And they die. And then you become the arbiter of their will for whatever reason. It falls to you, or it's whatever. Or the judge decides that they're going to dispose of it. And the judge goes, well, I'm going to take all their money and I'm going to donate it to my alma mater, right? They died without intestate, and so I'm going to take their money and I'm going to donate it to the college that I went to, and not say the college that the person who died went to, or the church that they went to, or whatever else. And you could always say, well, sometimes people make random donations, so maybe this person, let's just think that maybe this person would have decided to donate to my alma mater, or my private charity, or whatever else. But no, and I forget that there's a Latin term for this, a legal term for this, but you're kind of obligated in that case when you have fiduciary responsibility over somebody who can't make a decision themselves. In that case, because they're dead. In the case of a neonate, because they're not able to express their will in any way or understand fully what's going on. You can't just say, well, this is what I would do, or this is what some very small proportion of people would do. You have to kind of go, what would a reasonable person do? And we know that a reasonable person, most of them, the vast majority, do not decide to get circumcised. So to assume that they would want to is not accurate. We know for a fact that they probably will not want to get circumcised, because very few of them choose to do so, even though that's obviously an option, even when there is a lot of pressure. And so that's the first part. The second part is the assumption here that it's not going to please a woman. Do you not think that women in Europe are pleased, or women in Asia are pleased, or women in South America or Central America or Canada are pleased? Like, I think this again shows a lot of cultural, and I don't want to make it personal. It's an argument people make, so I'm addressing the argument, but it just carries so much cultural baggage. Again, just like it thinks it's okay. The question implies that it's okay to cut off a foreskin, but you probably wouldn't think it's okay to cut off an earlobe, or a clitoris, or a clitoral hood, or to put scars on the face, or elongate the neck, or file the teeth, or flatten the forehead, or bind the feet, or but this one somehow it's okay. So all these other cultures, the majority, 70% of the world, maybe more, don't do circumcision at all at any stage. The ones that do it for religious reasons. So they don't go around saying that it's for the pleasure of the woman. It's because God commanded Abraham to, or because Muhammad said that it was a good idea, although not necessarily a mandate in Islam. It's a little bit more nuanced with Islam. It's not usually a mandate. It's just considered laudable by most doctrines in Islam. Of course, there are several, but so European women are fine, and the other thing is American women like the push for circumcision was from doctors. It wasn't from women. American men were all uncircumcised as well. The majority until the 1920s, and with the vast majority if you go before 1900. And it wasn't American women going and saying, "Please circumcise our sons because it feels better when they're circumcised." It was doctors pushing it because they said it would protect you from masturbation, syphilis, cancer, right, and a couple other ridiculous things. And they said it would reduce your pleasure. They didn't say it would increase the pleasure of the woman. In fact, increasing the pleasure of a woman, if that was true, if they believed that increasing the pleasure of the woman happened from circumcision, they probably wouldn't have do it because they didn't want women to feel pleasure. When circumcision became popular, when the reason that we have all this social inertia, when all of our great-grandfathers were getting circumcised, basically, if they had known that this was going to, if they had thought, not known, if they had thought that this would increase the pleasure of a woman, they probably wouldn't do it. That's not the reason it started. That's not the reason they're doing it. This is a rationalization after the fact. And it's also American women who have been acculturized to, they don't understand it. They don't know what it's like. They just think it's weird because they don't have any experience with it. So here's another meta point on that that's non-cultural. It's biological. Humans are unlike a lot of other primates in that when a woman is fertile is not outwardly apparent. Now, there's things about pheromones, and sometimes men can have a sense for this, but it's not clear. It's not like a baboon where their rectal glands like swell and turn bright red, and all the males know she's in heat right now. It's time. If you have sex with her, there's a good chance she'll get pregnant. American women are not American. Human women are not like that. Human women are kind of like secretly on fertile, secretly in estrus, and so they have a lot of control over who gets to impregnate them. Even if they're married, they can, hey, it's my time of the month. I'm going to go hang out with a pool boy or whatever. And so this is all to say that the way that we are, the way that our bodies have evolved is because of the sexual selection of women, right? It's because of what women want that we have evolved the bodies that we have, and we have a foreskin. The average man has a penis where the head of the penis is fully covered by skin when it's soft, and some degree covered when it's hard. Sometimes not at all, sometimes all the way. That varies a lot more. But there's enough skin that it is usually fully covered or almost fully covered when soft, when flaccid. That is the evolutionary choice of 100,000 generations of women. They obviously prefer it. If they didn't, we would not have foreskins. If women found more pleasure from cut guys, they would have evolved away foreskins before we ever had an internet to discuss it. So just at a basic logical level, that really doesn't make a lot of sense. Then the other thing is it evolved for a reason, and it didn't evolve, like the foreskin did not evolve so that gay guys can enjoy it. I mean, gay guys often do enjoy foreskin. It's fun to play with an uncut cock. They can do a lot more. They have a lot more function. There's just so much more about them. They're more sensitive, that you can get more intimate. You can connect with somebody better. But it didn't. You have to understand that again, this is almost like saying like, well, foreskins are there for gay. They're good for gay dudes, but for women, no. No, they're not there for gay dudes. They're there for women. They're there because women like them. They're because they benefit the man and they benefit the woman. They evolved for a reason. So when you have intercourse with a woman, you're going to be more sensitive, more receptive to her. It's going to be smoother, right? Because when you have sex, when you have penetrative intercourse with an uncut penis, with an uncircumcised intact penis, there's this gliding motion. It helps. You don't need lube. It's self-lubricating. It keeps the fluids inside. The turtleneck forms as kind of a dam that keeps her flowing in. I don't know. Like, this is, obviously beyond my personal experience. But you can go and find whole websites, and I'll put links to some of them, of women describing how much they prefer uncircumcised men. I did an interview, and I'll put a link in the description, years ago with a guy who got circumcised as an adult, and he talked about how, he had had a couple girlfriends before he got circumcised, and he met some of them many years later, 20, 30, 40 years later, and they would say stuff like, I never really met a guy like you. I really felt like we were more connected than anybody else. And they even he cites in the interview, you can watch it yourself, that the fact that he had been uncircumcised at the time was the reason, that they were like, wow, like we're more connected. And it is. You have more nerve endings. So it's actually kind of beautiful in the way that they tessellate, because when the most sensitive part of the foreskin is the tip, the ringed band at the tip. When you get erect, and and especially if you penetrate, this is even for somebody whose foreskin is long enough that it fully covers even when hard. When you thrust, that most sensitive part that's at the tip rolls down and is now wrapped around your shaft at some point. And then that will line up with and rub the most sensitive part of the vagina. I don't know the terms as well, but like they match. Okay? So her most sensitive part is getting rubbed by your most sensitive part. This is why uncut guys, if they're gay, will do a process where they like kiss or dock, where they touch the two together, and it's like your most sensitive part is touching my most sensitive part, and it's like the most intimate thing you can do. I mean, there are gay men who will only meet other uncut gay men because they like that so much. It's so sensitive and so intimate. And if you're circumcised, you can't do that with either. So again, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's kind of a rationalization that makes a lot of assumptions about what you have the right to do and you don't. Like you think if they had like a dragon tattoo, the girls will love that. No, you can't do that. And that's more minor than cutting off part of their penis. They would never decide to do that. And if they ever do, then that will be their choice and they should be the one to make it. You, as their parent, don't have the right to chop them up. They're not a divisible piece of property that you can decide to do whatever you want as long as you think that it's a good idea. You have to bear in mind, the reasoning can't be what you think is best for them. The reason has to be what would they reasonably want to do, especially if we're talking about something that's irreversible. Less true with something like their religious teaching or because that's stuff that they can undo, unlike a circumcision, which they can't really. I mean, you can do restoration that helps a lot, but it's not the same thing, and it will not give you back the time that you lost. So I think also, and here's the other point, the rates of circumcision have really dropped a lot in the United States. We're now probably at something like half and half-ish. So if you're talking this conversation, all the things that I said before would apply if we had this conversation in 1950, 60, or 70, or 80. Those would all still apply. But the other thing is, but you might have had a point in that, well, if he is uncircumcised, he's going to be one of the only ones, and most women are not going to have had a lot of experience with them, and so that might cause problems. I think that they meant, because it's actually, and I'll find the quotes for that, reminded me of something else that's important to say. But now that's not true. If your son is born now, if you're having a son now, he is not going to be the only uncircumcised guy. He's going to be one and a half. He could even be in a majority of guys who are circumcised. And so women are not going to grow up finding it mysterious or weird or strange. It's going to be the norm. And we're fast becoming to a point where it's actually going to be the cut guys who are marginalized because they're the ones missing anatomy. There's just no logical sense to say, well, the most sensitive parts, some of your penis has been cut away, that'll make you better in bed. Absolutely not. And here's another point I'll go. So Moses Maimonides, a very famous Jewish theologian, he was a doctor, I believe in the 1100s in the 12th century in the Middle East, and he worked a lot with Muslims, a lot with Jews, and a lot with Gentiles. And he wrote a lot about circumcision. So as a doctor, he dealt with this a lot, and he advised that circumcision was good for Jews because it would reduce their sexual passions. They wouldn't have as much sexual pleasure, and then they could focus on more important things like reading the Torah or the Talmud or whatever. So I don't agree with that argument, but it has its own logic to it. It just, but he also said that Jewish women should avoid Gentile men because if they tried an intact penis, he says they would never go back. The intact penis would feel so good and be so superior to a cut penis that they would never want a cut penis again. And then Jews would have this huge problem because you can't be Jewish unless your mother's Jewish, and if she's banging all the uncut Gentile men, what have we done? I guess they would still be Jewish if she was Jewish, but then they would have Gentile fathers and probably not be raised Jewish. So in his opinion, and he was a guy who had experience with this, and he wrote about this explicitly, the Gentiles were superior sexually, and that Jewish women should avoid them. And I think that you can say, well, this was 800 years ago, and what does he really know? It's like, well, it makes perfect logical sense, though, right? It absolutely makes perfect logical sense. In fact, the contrary argument that removing stuff that evolved because women liked it in the first place, right? If they didn't like it, they wouldn't pick. If they're looking at all their mate options, and they were like, man, the one with the shortest foreskins, that's fucking hot, and they give it up for him every time, a couple hundred generations of that, we're not going to have much of a foreskin anymore. But we do. Like when we're born, our dicks are fully covered, and when we're adults, they're typically fully covered. There's 2%, 3% where it's a little bit shorter, 2 or 3% where it's a lot longer. But yeah, they're fully covered because that's what women want, biologically speaking. And that's what women wanted here until the doctors cut away all the foreskin, and then they grew up where every boy in the high school was cut, and then they had their sons cut because the father said that they wanted it done, and because, adamant father syndrome, and then they feel culpable, right? They made the decision to do it, so like the most hardcore pro-circ people are not that this category would include like almost everybody, so I know it's maybe not a good categorization, but it's like men who got circumcised and they want to rationalize what was done to them, and then women who are not circumcised but want to rationalize what they did to their sons. Nobody wants to say, oh, this was a mistake. Why did I do this to my son? And so they double down. I'm like, no, it's better, it's better, it's better. When I saw the Bloodstained Men in person in Gillette, Wyoming, the only counter-protester was a woman, and she had a son, and her son was not into the protest at all. He probably just didn't care about circumcision one or the other, but he was kind of in the background. But she was just screaming her lungs, it's fine, it's cleaner, it's better. She's probably never been with an uncut cock in her life. Doesn't know fuck all about it. I mean, there's so much. There's pheromones in it. There's pheromone receptors in a foreskin. They know that they're there. They don't know what they're for. But okay, your foreskin has pheromone receptors, and you're going to be plunging that thing into a pussy. I think that probably has something to do with it. Yeah. So it's a good question. Again, the whole topic is an interesting one where it gets into the rights, but I don't think that you would, for a second, agree with any other surgeries removing healthy tissue. Because there's a chance that it might make them more desirable. And again, it's assuming it does actually make them more desirable, and I think that's wrong. So I'll put links to that interview I did with the guy. I'll try and find the Moses Maimonides quote, and I'll also put links to some articles by women saying how much they prefer, American women saying how much they prefer it. I'll go from there. So anyway, thanks a lot, guys. I hope you all have a great weekend. If you ever have a baby, don't circumcise him. And if you are uncircumcised or you are against it, I do think that it is important to speak out, because people do really make decisions based on this. There's ways to do it and ways not to do it. You can be preachy and catty and annoying and just drive people away, and you certainly don't want that approach. But if you approach it with openness and sincerity, people will change their minds, and that's what we need. We need people to change their minds, especially young parents who are expecting children or are going to have children. Or young adult. I mean, it's fine to convince a younger person who's not about to have kids, because then when they do have kids, they'll have that in mind. But anyway, great question. Thank you very much for that question. If you guys have other questions, always leave them in the comments, and if they're good and I don't want to, they're not simple one-word responses, I'll make videos about them. And the other thing too, how's the mic? I think it's sounding a lot better, but leave comments on how the audio is if you got this far. And everyone have a great weekend. All right, bye-bye.